The sign balanced between Rebekah's dry, cracked fingers had been inscribed with a single word: harlot. Peter Nelson, the local magistrate, had forced her to paint the word herself, to hold the sign as high as she could as she stood upon a barrel outside the church doors. The word bore down on her with a crushing weight that was twice as heavy as the plank of wood it had been painted on. But Rebekah held fast. Her arms burned above her as the magistrate, a lumbering galumpus of a man, paced like a beast at her feet. With each turn of his wide shoulders, she counted down the seconds until her sentence was over. "Please." Such a pitiful word, pulled not from Rebekah's lips, but from Reverend Wainwright, who stood a short way off. Might she be permitted to eat something? Rebekah's stomach cramped in agreement. 12 hours had passed without food or drink of any kind. Dizziness curled the edges of her vision as she listened, numbly, to the Reverend's quiet intercession. "I think not," came Nelson's oily reply. "How else is she to learn?" At that, the Reverend's tone sharpened. "Surely she might come into the church to pray, to confess." Nelson laughed. He acted the part of Puritan, but was nothing of the sort, as Rebekah had lately discovered through a series of unsavory advances. "I appreciate your tactics, Reverend, but they are not the ways of good government. If we allow one bawd into our midst, we will soon have a dozen. It pains me, of course, but we must make a public example of her." Rebekah would have scoffed, but her chest was too tight as she swallowed against another press of tears. She was, as far as she could remember, the only woman to be made an example of in such a way. Haverstraw's illicit markets, such as they were of a trifling nature, and so most women faced few repercussions as long as they were discreet. As for Rebekah, one night in Mason's bed had been enough to ruin her. She'd been barely 17 at the time. 23 and charming, Mason was the kind of man who appealed to a motherless girl with a stern, forbidding father. Rebekah had cared for him, truly, and trusted him enough that when she learned he was leaving, she'd stepped into his arms and let him show her all the ways he wanted to love her. Mason had promised to return, to write to her, and she'd believed him. Yet that was all well over a year ago, and she'd had no word.